All right, let's jump right in. Tonight we're pulling back the curtain on one of the world's most popular holidays, Halloween. We're going to dig into the surprising and, for some, pretty unsettling history behind all those traditions we know and love.
So think about it for a second. Beyond all the parties and the sugar rush from all that candy, what are we really celebrating? Let's do a little investigating and trace the ancient roots that gave birth to this modern festival.
To start, we really need to look past the fun and games we're so familiar with and take a journey way back to its origins.
For most of us, right, it's just a night for kids and some playful scares. But the traditions we follow so casually, from the costumes to the candy, they have a story that is far older and way more complex than you probably imagine.
To find the true origin of Halloween, we have to travel back in time. We're talking over 2,000 years to an ancient pagan festival.
This festival was called Samhain, and just so you know, it's pronounced Samhain. According to the World Book Encyclopedia, for the Celts, this day marked the end of the harvest and the beginning of the long, dark, cold winter, a time of year they often associated with death.
And this right here, this is the absolute key. The Celts believed that on the night before their new year, the boundary between our world and the spirit world got super thin. It practically blurred into nothing, and this allowed the ghosts of the dead to return to Earth, for good or for ill.
So, how did this ancient belief in wandering spirits turn into our modern traditions? Well, let's break it down, custom by custom.
First up, let's talk about dressing up. It's not just about looking like your favorite superhero, you know. The original purpose was actually much more serious.
That's right. The whole idea was to trick the spirits. If you looked like one of them, scary and otherworldly, any malicious ghosts roaming the earth that night would just pass you by thinking you were one of their own. It was basically a form of supernatural camouflage.
Okay, so what about the main event for most kids? Going door to door for candy. Where in the world did trick or treat come from?
Now, what's really interesting here is that this has a dual origin. On one hand, you had the Celts leaving sweets out to pacify angry spirits. Then, centuries later in medieval Europe, the church had a custom where people would go door to door on All Souls' Day, offering prayers for the dead in exchange for little gifts of food. Over time, these two streams just kind of merged into the tradition we know today.
And finally, we have to talk about the most iconic symbol of the holiday, that glowing carved pumpkin, the jack-o'-lantern. So get this, before there were pumpkins, there were turnips. People in Britain would carve them up, place a candle inside, and the whole point was that the light would scare away evil spirits. But then, when Irish immigrants came to America, they found that pumpkins were way more common and, frankly, a lot easier to carve. And just like that, a new tradition was born.
Now, given these pagan origins, it's really not surprising that for some people, the holiday creates a bit of a conflict. The sources for this explainer highlight a direct tension between Halloween's history and certain scriptural teachings.
So from the perspective of our source material, these deep connections to communicating with the dead and appeasing spirits are seen as just incompatible with biblical principles. Let's look at the specific texts they cite to back up this argument.
The first point they make is that any attempt to inquire of the dead is explicitly forbidden. And from this viewpoint, it doesn't matter if it's done seriously or just for fun. The practice itself is seen as off-limits.
This next verse is used to argue against the entire foundation of Samhain. If the dead are totally unconscious and know nothing at all, then, well, they can't be communicating with the living. So the belief that spirits of the dead are walking the earth on Halloween is seen as simply not true.
And this brings us to the final point from our sources. This verse is used to argue that you can't really partake in activities associated with God and with demons. So, from this perspective, celebrations with roots in Spiritism are viewed as a direct contradiction for believers.
So how did an ancient Celtic ritual transform into the massive, commercialized holiday we see today? Let's trace that incredible journey.
You can just see from this timeline how Halloween was shaped by centuries of change. It started with the Celts, got adapted by the Romans, and later even merged with Christian holidays. The name itself, Halloween, is just a mashup of All Hallows' Eve, the night before All Saints' Day. But it was its arrival in 19th century America with Irish immigrants that really put it on the path to becoming the global phenomenon it is today.
This quote, which is cited in our sources, really highlights the modern tension. While many of us see the holiday as secular fun, others who practice ancient pagan traditions, like Wiccans, still see it as their most sacred night, Samhain. This quote suggests they feel a sense of validation when others participate, whether they know it or not.
And today, the numbers are just staggering. Halloween is no longer just a cultural festival. It's a global industry that brings in over $10 billion every single year in spending on costumes, decorations, and candy.
So we've traced the path from a sacred ritual to a commercial spectacle, from warding off spirits to buying them in the candy aisle. Knowing its roots in both pagan belief and billion-dollar business, the question isn't just what you'll be for Halloween, but what does Halloween become for all of us?